We have liftoff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SSPI podcast by Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Tamara Bond-Williams, Executive Director of SSPI. Today, we continue Are We There Yet? Our series exploring the space safety economy, sponsored by the American Space Exploration Children's Trust Fund. In earlier episodes, we've explored how insurance, investment, and infrastructure can help create safer space operations. Our question today: if we want a safer and more sustainable space future, what's the fastest way to achieve it? Through government policy? Through industry standards? Through market incentives? Or through some combination of all three? Our guest today is Dr. Joseph Pelton. Joe is a member of the Space and Satellite Hall of Fame, one of the original satellite groupies, the first president of SSP before it became SSPI, and the author and or co-author of more than 70 books on satellites, communications, space development, and space safety. His most recent book, Future Challenges for NASA, the Moon, Mars, and More, examines the technologies, systems, institutions, and long-term planning needed to support safe and sustainable human activities in space. I believe that Joe has an opening statement before we get into it. So, with that, hi, Joe. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you, and I think this is an exciting, important subject, and I think it's broader than some people would imagine, and that's my opening statement, that space safety is key to the space economy and global space systems of all types. And these are increasingly key to the viability and economic success of the entirety of planet Earth. This is because space safety is broader than many people think. It's important to planetary defense against cosmic hazards such as comets, asteroids, and even cosmic bodies that sail through our solar system. It's also important in terms of defense against space weather and storms that could wipe out the global infrastructure on which our economy depends, and that particularly coronal mass ejections could wipe out our electronic infrastructure on which we depend. So I think space safety is a much broader subject than many people think, but certainly the key critical space safety issue today, in my view, is dealing with space debris. And this is in terms of active measures, regulatory, and all three of the areas you mentioned where we need to globally agree to attack the space debris problem.
Yeah, Joe, I want to acknowledge your opening statement, and I just have to say, there are things that we know, but our conversation gets so fragmented. And so I'm really grateful for you setting the table the way you just did. I forgot that a key piece of space safety is actually coronal mass ejections. And it's a thing that I know, but it's a thing that has not come up yet in this conversation. So really, thank you so much for helping us see the broader picture of the hazards impacting the space environment, and for tying that safety issue to life on Earth, right? Because we've become so reliant and so accustomed to the abilities that our space-enabled economy makes for us. It's an interesting dynamic that we talk about space safety as if it's separate from life on Earth.
And let me just note that my organization, which I organized with a number of people from around the world about 4 years ago, and now we're a permanent observer to the UN Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, is that we are trying to get countries and users of space systems around the world to enter into compact agreements to use space systems to address the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And so, again, space systems are key to better agriculture, to urban planning, to planetary defense against solar storms, to clean water, and all of the environmental aspects of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we see space safety in a very broad context, and this is one of the things that we're doing with our organization, which we call ACES, that's Alliance for Collaboration in the Exploration of Space.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and congratulations on achieving observer status with UNUSA. Is that how you say it? Is it UNUSA or UNOSA? I'm never quite sure.
Well, both ways seem to work, and
Okay.
and the point is we will also be joining the UN Economic and Social Council and the International Astronautical Federation this year as well.
Okay. Well, let me just kind of try to dig a little bit into the topic we're trying to get at. So, in preparation for this conversation, Joe, I mentioned to you that this is the topic is the space safety economy, and your immediate question was, what is that? And I'm not sure it exists. And we've been wrestling with this as part of this podcast, and also the entire series actually is there such a thing, and what is it if it is it coming, is it real, is it separate? And and I have an opinion, but I want to tease out a little bit more of the parameters. So when when you look at the space industry today, I think you've said this, but I want to clarify. What do you see as the most important safety challenges that we need to address? And I think I heard you say in the opening statement, but just for the record, let me just make sure I'm clear on this.
All
Yeah.
right. So clearly, in my view, the space debris problem is critical. I believe that some reports say that there are now some 45,000
Mm,
objects above 10 centimeters, the size of a baseball, uh, that are being tracked, and
wow.
that this number continues to increase, and that the deployment of the so-called mega LEO systems in terms of their deployment and their decommissioning and deorbiting uh, in studies that have been done by the Aerospace Corporation and others suggests that we're going to see increasing debris collisions and that this is going to go up unless there can be a global agreement on space traffic management and control systems, and that this is a critical thing to seek to achieve. And of course, this is being addressed in the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and working groups. But again, there has not been any way to get consensus, and even the mitigation procedures that are now in place are voluntary, and
Mm,
we really need enforceable systems. And this is why I think at the national level, there has to be strong regulations that are increasingly strong and mandatory, backed with fines or penalties against not following these rules. But we need an international system to coordinate these national regulatory processes as well. So to me, this is number one, and that we cannot cope with this with the technology we have in place certainly we have increasingly smart AI-based collision avoidance systems, and there are things that can be done to better decommission satellites and so on. But we have to renew and strengthen this effort, and particularly the leading space organizations in the US, Russia, and China, and then, of course, Europe and Japan and other spacefaring nations really need to focus on how we can stop the debris buildup.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, let me just dig into that a little bit. So, I think that there's generally amongst certainly amongst anybody I've spoken to a broad agreement that this issue of debris is a huge issue. And we've been, banging at it for a minute now. And are very grateful to the American Space Exploration Children's Trust Fund for inviting the industry into this conversation. Um, but when I think about what you just said, that we need international standards, we need national uh, enforcement. When I think about that system, that institutional layer that you're describing, I have two minds. The first thing that I think about is that, yeah, if we had that, it would standardize the ask. It would make it easier for commercial players, for instance, to meet the demand. On the other hand, literally just last night, I was watching a YouTube video. It was very funny. It was like a humorous kind of a thing. And they were talking about how they were trying to figure out the road signs, the international system of road signs, and how there were several attempts to hammer out signs for the road. And they did hammer them out over and over again, and nobody adopted them. Like they could get no agreement. But we still do have a system of road signs. And so it seemed like, at least in that case, the conversation was more important than the actual achievement. Um, do you think that we actually will get to, first of all, let me start there. Do you think we'll actually get any kind of common ground, or do you think that nations will run ahead, which is what happened in the case of road signs? Nations ran ahead because they had their own needs.
Well, this is a classic economic problem of that in terms of collisions of ships at sea. And everybody who operated at the oceans would like to see lighthouses up and operational, but
Hmm.
nobody really wanted to pay for them. And the
Yeah.
point is, unless you have some sort of agreement to say, yes, we have to have lighthouses and that our governments will pay for them, or we will have a collective system to pay for them, uh, then you have crashes at sea. Well, we have the same sort of problem in space that nobody wants to pay for the lighthouses in space system to create space safety. And
Yeah.
as we're getting to a threshold critical point, the so-called Kessler Syndrome, where that it isn't just what we're putting up that is at risk, is that we have enough debris out there that it's creating its own debris and creating a lethal shield that will deny us access to space because
Hmm.
they won't be able to launch things safely without them crashing into debris. So this is really a point of uh, criticality, in my view, that Donald Kessler raised this issue 40 years ago, and no one took it seriously then because actually natural debris from micrometeorites and what have you was a bigger problem. But year by year, this issue has grown and grown and grown. And I think we are really at the threshold of the Kessler syndrome unless we can start agreeing on active debris removal procedures. We need to revise the UN liability convention
Mm.
because right now There's absolute liability if you bring something down and it crashes in and creates a radioactive damage on Earth. You are under the convention absolutely responsible for that and paying for the damages. But in outer space, they didn't anticipate that there would be this kind of a problem there. And so the liability convention is a really big problem because the people who are launching have no feeling of financial risk of not taking care of debris because there's no convention that brings this into direct focus. So it's a issue of technical improvements with regard to collision avoidance. It's better decommissioning processes to shut down and make sure your batteries or your fuel systems don't create explosions and blow things up. It's a whole host of things. And the working group in the UN COPIUS have identified a lot of these, and the mitigation procedures that they have developed address some of these, but there is not the strength of enforcement behind them. There's no fines for not following these rules, and we have no clear process for active debris removal, even though we now have new space services industry that's able to undertake these types of actions. So it's a wide range of things that have to be done. And the thing is, we've got a good list of what needs to be done, but we have not got the regulatory processes to make it all work.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing, and you'll correct me, but I think what I'm hearing is that the biggest place where we're vulnerable is in a gap, right? Let me say what that means to me. Going back to your lighthouse example, it occurs to me, just thinking about this from an economic standpoint, that one could reasonably uh, charge for the use of a lighthouse. Like, hey, I want this lighthouse to exist. If I'm going to pass through these roadways, I'm going to pay a fee because it funds the lighthouse. And so there's an economic incentive because someone wants to get there, right? Someone wants to use that road, that waterway. So there's a way that can be funded privately even.
Right. Well,
But
let
no,
me
go ahead.
to say that I wrote a paper, I guess it was a decade ago,
Hmm.
for a big symposium that the International Space University recommending that we have what is equivalent of a space insurance process,
Hmm.
and that just as people buy insurance for against launch failures and what have you, that there could also be an insurance fee that people would buy that would pay into a fund that could be used for active space debris removal, and that actually there could be subtleties involved that you would pay a certain amount into this insurance fund for debris removal, but also you would get a refund if you had a clean launch and a clean deorbit of your system and so on, so that there would be a financial incentive for you to remove your end-of-life satellite and get a rebate on the amount of money you paid into this insurance fund. So anyway, that was suggested by me 10 years ago, and there have been other variations on that theme
Hmm.
that could be done, and it would really be very much like a commercial insurance operation
Hmm.
if we could get agreement to implement something like that.
Yeah. And so in that scenario, well, let me just ask, what's the response? Because we started this conversation with the insurance, and from what I understand, right now, the insurers are looking at the risk to space from the standpoint of hardware failure, and it's not yet high priority for them. the risk of collision in space, right? They're not yet pricing
Right.
that into their thinking.
Right. And the space insurance people have overpriced the costs and the risk and so on. When I was at Intelsat, we decided to, in effect, self-insure just
Hmm.
because the rates were higher than the market risk involved. And so there's a lot of, if you will, uh, analytic work that could be done that could refine what the formulas would be. And I've talked to Chris Kunstler and others in the space insurance business, and they think there's some merit in this idea. But again, it's a long way from concept to an actual process that could work, that could be implemented.
Hmm. So if we had, okay, so that's one economic engine that you're describing. And I think what I'm trying to get to is what I'm seeing and what you're describing is that there are a lot of things that economic activity will naturally, respond to, and there are things that will fall through the gaps if there's not a consensus, like a global consensus as to what we do about things that are not typical, but they're still necessary, right? And so I was going back to this lighthouse idea. You can make a lot of money for a waterway that's well used, and you could make almost none for a waterway that's not, but you still need the lighthouse. And so there still needs to be a funding mechanism for that.
Right. And that's certainly the biggest risk in low Earth orbit, and
Hmm.
who are, operating in geo and so on, they would say, well, can we pay a lower rate and so on. So there's a whole lot of analytic process to figure out, where the greatest dangers are, what kinds of rates that people could apply, and that also, uh, if you will, systems like Starlink and Amazon Leo, they would have to pay uh, clearly a much larger amount of money into the system than other people. And
Hmm.
uh, the whole issue of do CubeSats really count or what have you. So it's a complicated set of issues, and that without some sort of a major incentive, and some people say, well, the only way to solve this problem is for a huge crash and debris uh, situation that really imperils the whole space industry before people to really get serious about it. I hope, unfortunately, that that's not the case. But anyway, uh, unless people take this seriously and start looking seriously for answers, we're not going to make progress.
Yeah. Let me pull at that, right? So CubeSats, Leo orbits, constellations, they all their claim to fame is that they're cheap. And so if we add this insurance burden on them, and as you say, they're the highest risk, and so it makes sense. But all of a sudden the economics of it change dramatically. And so you think to yourself, as you say, it's a complex issue, but when I think about how do we deal with this, I begin to think, well, we don't want to disincentivize these activities, especially CubeSats, right? Because who's launching the little teeny weeny little things and gaining the most benefit? Students are throwing up these things in space, right?
The point is, it wouldn't have to be a burden. I've done some analysis on this, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that this type of a funding mechanism could be less than what people are paying for space insurance, for instance.
Mm.
In other words,
Okay.
I think it'd be half the cost of what people pay for launch insurance. And the point is, if they really understand that the risks are to the whole industry is truly becoming severe, that creating such a insurance mechanism, and again, people are, I think, wary of governmental solutions and governmental industries and what, but clearly the system that ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, has worked out has worked pretty well because essentially it's just coordinated what national regulatory systems already have in place.
Mm-hmm.
So the costs did not have to be exorbitantly high, and that on-orbit service companies' ability to remove debris and what have you is going to be increasingly cost effective and so on. So if people start looking at this seriously and running the numbers, I think that they could say, hey, paying a half of what we pay for launch insurance to ensure that we don't lose access to space is a pretty good bargain.
Yeah. I want to borrow from the idea of auto insurance. When I get my auto insurance, there's a whole suite of features that I can or cannot pay for um, upfront with the purchase of the vehicle that lower my insurance, right? I can have all sorts of safety features baked in. And so the idea that you talked about, well, that you built your satellite or to be able to deorbit effectively or things like that, that's part of it, right? But also if I have a if I have a contract for space situational awareness so that I don't bump into things while I'm in orbit. If I pay for all these things up front, that it would reduce my insurance. Is that is that a reasonable way to think about this?
Well, yes, as I say, there were a whole lot of issues that could be uh, plugged into this system, and that the space insurance companies would be the right type of expertise to sort this out. But as I say, that there could be a rebate if you have a clean launch and you deorbit your satellites, so that you would be not necessarily just paying an insurance policy, but that you would get rebates if you do the right thing and you take care of your debris problems.
Mhm.
So there's a whole lot of details to be examined, but until countries like China and Russia, who have opposed trying to implement a space traffic management system, which has been under discussions for more than a decade within the working group on the long-term sustainability of outer space.
Yeah. What's the opposite? What is the opposition? Is it just that some of their assets are military assets and they don't want them tracked? What's the opposition?
Well, I think that there's several things. One of them is distrust about, who would operate this system and so on. Uh,
Hmm.
and actually, if you look at risk, of course, the three biggest risk uh, providers are the US, China, and Russia. Uh,
Hmm.
they have the most space debris up there. They have the biggest satellites that are targets for a major collision, and there's a top 50 of the worst uh, debris elements up there that are huge targets.
Yeah.
One of them is from Europe, but most of them are from Russia, uh, and these are the big upper stage vehicles.
Yeah. Interesting. So they are disincentivized because they are already major contributors to the problem.
Yes.
And so then the question becomes, is there is is there a way to re-incentivize them, right? Given that they're such a big, you know, polluter in this regard, right? They're actually polluting the environment. And and it's been in the news, right? Oh, Russia blew up a thing. And you're like, why would you do that? But they did it.
irony is we don't learn. People think that this is just an issue about Earth. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
with all the things that we are doing and putting in orbit around the moon, this will be a lunar problem and not the to
No,
this future.
that's
And
right.
it's interesting that Steve Freeland, who is a major space lawyer who is chairing one of the working groups at the UN COPIUS, uh, he actually inserted in the Artemis Agreement the issue of considering space debris issues around the moon. And
Hmm.
that's actually a part of the Artemis Agreement. But again, Artemis Agreement is again not a mandatory process and so on that people tend to say, oh, yes, we'll agree to something as long as it's a voluntary system and there's no penalties against not following the rules. So
Yeah.
uh, it's
Yeah. And
complicated,
and of course China and Russia are not in the Artemis Accords either.
right?
Hmm. Wow. Okay. Well, this is an interesting dilemma, and I'm deeply curious as to how we arrive at the right incentives. And this is where this conversation that we're trying to have around the idea of space safety economy comes in, is that we're trying to think about that actually there's a way to make money doing it.
Right. Well,
Like,
or at least to be financially efficient and not inefficient in how it's done, and so that the payments in are and their benefits exceed the cost of doing it. And
mm-hmm.
should be the formula. But
Yeah.
before we end, I would just like to come back to the issue of planetary defense and so on. And
Mm-hmm.
people talk about planetary defense. The main thing that people worry about are asteroids and what have you.
Yeah.
But in terms of probability, the biggest danger, in my view, is related to massive solar storms. That
Yeah.
we had the so-called Carrington event back in 1859, and that at that time the only electrical activity that was happening were telegraph offices, and they caught on fire from this event.
Oh.
And that we've had, of course, more recently solar storms such as the so-called Montreal event that took out transformers between Chicago and Montreal. We had the Halloween event in Scandinavia and what have you that took out electrical power in Scandinavia. Uh, uh, but these are many versions of the Carrington event. But there's
Mhm.
evidence that in these, uh, you know, 150 years before the Carrington event that there was a similar event that was lit up the skies, that the so-called coronal borealis came down when the Carrington event occurred, all the way down to Cuba and Hawaii and so on, lit up the skies. And
Hmm.
that it would potentially such event that occurs about every 150 years, and we're well overdue for 150 years for a Carrington event type thing, that could take out electrical power systems around the world. It could take out satellites and what have you, and that this is perhaps a even bigger risk by far than space debris, and that people don't realize that maybe we do have the technology coming along that could protect us from solar storms and so on. I'm working with a colleague of mine who used to be chief scientist of NASA on whether we could create a magnetic shielding system for Mars to be able to terraform Mars. But we have also looked at could we do something similar for the moon or even for Earth, and that we have so much of our world economy now based on global electrical power, electrical communications and systems, and that if there were a truly massive Carrington event, it could take out our satellites, take out our electrical power systems. There was a study done by Lloyd's of London that suggested that this would be a $3 trillion expense just to bring back electrical power systems for North America if there were something like a Carrington event. And so just before we end, just to note that space debris is number one on my concern list, but also trying to actually create better circuit breaker power systems for our electrical power systems, and doing a number of things that we could do both in space and on the ground to protect us against these solar storms that seem to happen about every 150 years. And people say, well, gee, why do we need to worry about it now? Has things in space changed? And the answer is no. But Earth has changed. We have gone from 1 billion people to 8.3 billion people. We have electrical power grid systems and so on that were not around when the Carrington event occurred, but they are very much vulnerable, and that they are not well protected. And there are a number of things that can be done on the ground and in space to better protect our global infrastructure from space-related events.
Wow. I can talk to you about that forever. I mean, there's just so many different angles we can go. I'll ask this last question and then we'll wrap. So in relation to this space solar storm question, as you say, we have become very dependent on lots of systems that didn't exist even 150 years ago, including our network of satellites that enables so much of life on Earth today. So much of things, we talk about the other 3 billion. I don't know if it's still that number or not. I hope we've closed the gap, um, but we talk about that because we've recognized that the value that space and satellite bring to human life needs to be shared across all of humanity and not just those of us who are lucky enough to be in well-developed nations. But it sounds like from what you're describing, that those very symptoms that we very proudly have built and count on and take for granted are very vulnerable. Do we have any built-in defenses for these systems yet?
The thing is, there's been some attempts to put in, if you will, more heavy-duty circuit breaker systems. And there is one can go online to see the dashboard indicator that is operated by the U.S. and other entities to show solar event and solar weather. The Japanese actually, they have solar weather and space weather news as part of the news for broadcast. So anyway, there is a lot more we could do in terms of being able to shut down against X level and very high radiation levels. People don't understand that there's two kinds of events. There's basically what's called a solar radiation, where you have radiation that can come and that can knock out systems and so on. But then there are the coronal mass ejections, and here we're talking about actual physical ions, blast things, and those are the most dangerous. That's what the coronal mass ejections are all about. And about half the solar storm events that happen on the sun are just radiation, but about half the time there's also some sort of a ejection, mass ejection as well. And those are the ones that can do the most damage to electrical power systems, because our Earth's magnetic field does block this from happening. But is one of the things that is not reported or well known about, but that the Earth's magnetic field reverses itself every so often, and we're in a reversal system right now. And there are projections that if you will, magnetic north has moved down to Siberia, and the magnetic south has moved up to close to Australia, and that as this reversal occurs, that the Earth's natural protective systems will be diminished. And some of them suggest that at the worst of this reversal, our defensive systems will be 15% of what they are today. So this is another problem that people are not aware of, that the protective systems of Earth are also dynamic and are changing, and are not changing for the better right now. So it's a complicated set of issues. We're not going to solve them in our conversation today. Just trying to alert that space debris is a very serious problem, and that actually space weather is increasingly a problem to all of our electronic infrastructure, from satellites to automatic control systems. We have systems that control our elevators, our pipelines, and what have you. And if those are knocked out, we lose our oil supply through automated pipeline systems. We are far, far more vulnerable today just because we have more people, more electronic control systems that work wonderfully when they're working. But when they shut down, we could cripple our global economy.
Joe, you've now made a very strong case that I should invite our 2023 20 under 35 and Promise Award winner Onyinye Nwankwo to the podcast, because space weather, and specifically solar events, was her specialty in research. And I'm now deeply curious. I was curious when she told me about it, but now I'm even more curious about how it plays into our thinking about the space safety economy. So thank you. Thank you so much, Joe, for being here and for expanding the conversation so richly.
Well, pleasure.
That concludes today's episode of Are We There Yet? The Lighthouse Problem in Space. We thank Dr. Joseph Pelton for joining us and helping us explore the role of governments, institutions, markets, and long-term planning in creating a safer and more sustainable future in space. Today's podcast is made possible by the support of SSPI's professional, student, and corporate members. We are especially grateful to the American Space Exploration Children's Trust Fund for sponsoring this series. To learn more about SSPI, visit sspi.org and follow us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, and on YouTube at SSPI Video, all one word. New episodes of the SSPI podcast are released every Monday. For SSPI and our producer, Ari Yates, I'm Tamara Bond-Williams. And for the people building a space and satellite future worthy of our highest aspirations, thank you for all you do.
4, 3, 2, 1. Earth is but one country. 5, 3, 2, 1. And mankind is citizens.